We're about to hear remarks from Scott Ritter about that speech. And just before I turn it over to him, I wanted to indicate to people that the goal of the JFK Peace Speech Committee is to try and get this speech circulated throughout the United States as extensively as possible, high schools, churches, community organizations. When this speech was given, it was actually so impressed Khrushchev that it was published throughout the Soviet Union, and Soviet citizens everywhere knew about it, and very few Americans did. So if you're interested in helping us in any way or being involved with this committee, you can put your email in the chat and we will definitely be in touch with you. That said, I'd like to turn things over to Scott. Looking very much forward to your remarks. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, everybody, Cole, Amar, for the invitation, especially in regards to the speech we just watched. I don't need to tell you, the people who have watched this speech and who are present today, how important that speech is. It's not hyperbole to say that it's one of the greatest speeches in American history, and it might be one of the greatest speeches of all humanity. The consequences that accrue for failing to live up to the aspirations of this speech are fatal for the world. JFK made it clear that a nuclear war would be the end of all humanity, and that peace is not just a nice to have, but it's an absolute. If we are to exist as a nation, as a people, as humanity together, we can only do so with peace. And yet when we take a look at the situation in the world that we live in today, we see no opportunity for peace. I'm struck when going back and looking at the time that existed when JFK delivered this speech, just how stark things were. Because people today will say, well, it's never been this bad. Well, it has. People tend to forget that in addition to the Cold War being there, in addition to the specter of the Iron Curtain having descended across Eastern Europe, a reference to Winston Churchill's Fulton, Missouri speech. In 1956, the Soviet Union invaded Hungary to put down a popular democratic uprising that created a crisis throughout Europe. In 1960, Gary Powers was shot down, an American pilot shot down over the city of Sverdlovsk, modern day Ekaterinburg. That was a very big deal. In 1961, 1 month after I was born, giving away my age here, the Berlin crisis, the crisis of the Berlin Wall, that manifested with 33 Soviet tanks facing off against an equivalent number of American tanks, all loaded with live ammunition, ready to fire at one another. Where do you see American tanks facing off against Russian tanks today? You don't, but we did back then. And then, of course, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the United States and the Soviet Union on the verge of a nuclear conflict that, had it ensued, would have been the deaths of hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people. Things were tough back there. That's the environment. And JFK had the courage to give this speech. This was not an easy speech. If you study the history of this speech and the way it was written, and I'm sure, again, you have, this was not an automatic. I mean, he only got away with this because he kept the State Department out of the writing process. My understanding is he had one of his advisors write this speech for him, or write this speech void of State Department interference. But this, again, it will go down in history, and should go down in history, as one of the greatest speeches of all time, not because of how it resonated at the time it was given, how it resonates today. Is there a more pure vision of peace than that speech today? What American politician could give that speech today? What global politician could give that speech today? And the answer is probably none. Definitely not any in the United States today. And this is why it's imperative that this speech be sent out, transmitted to as many people as possible, so they understand what the pursuit of peace really means, how it's articulated, how it balances off against the national interest. what can we do? That's the big question. What can we do as people? I'm continuously frustrated by the fact that here in the United States today, uh, we are stymied uh, in terms of any effort to pursue policies, pursue personal diplomacy of a nature that would create the opportunity for the kind of dialogue, understanding. You know, the Soviet Union that JFK spoke of, listen to his words. He didn't speak in praise of the government. He spoke in praise of the people, a great culture, a culture capable of doing great things, people who share the same values that we do. But today in America, we've blocked that out through what I call a disease, the disease of Russophobia. It's the fear of Russia, the fear of Russia. But what are we afraid of? And the fact is, most people can't articulate what they're afraid of. They can say the name of a Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, and from that, all evil accrues. They can speak of, Russian policies. They can speak of Russian military, but very rarely do you hear people speak of the Russian people, Russian culture, Russian history, the Russian soul. These are all very important things and they're relevant. And Kennedy touched upon them and touched upon their relevance and their importance to pursuit of peace, that we have a duty and responsibility as Americans to make common cause with the Russian people because they believe the same things we do. They believe in peace. They believe in a better world for their children. They believe in mutual respect of nations. But right now, all venues are stopped. You know, back in the day of Kennedy, in 1958, there was this Texan piano player, Van Cliburn, and he went to Moscow. He entered the first ever Tchaikovsky Music Festival, and he won. He won. He won the hearts of the Russians, who were very cultured people, by the way. And he played their music, and he played it with an American flair. And he came in first. He came back and he got a ticker tape parade in the Avenue of Heroes in New York City, the only classical musician in the history of the Avenue of Heroes ever to receive that. What courage. I always tell people, you have to be your own Van Cliburn. You have to find a way to go forth. But Van Cliburn wasn't alone. Dizzy Gillespie went to the Soviet Union in 1962. And, that was the time when, again, a lot of crisis, Berlin crisis, but Dizzy Gillespie went. The Soviets called his music degenerative music. They said jazz is the music of the degenerates. But the Soviet people, the Russians, the youth said, we want it, baby. We want to listen to that jazz. And they let Dizzy Gillespie go over and he gave concert after concert after concert, very successful cultural exchange. Leonard Bernstein, the composer, went there in 1959. And something amazing happened there. When he was doing his tour, he met with Boris Pasternak, a writer that had been somewhat shunned by the Soviets. He met with Shostakovich, a composer. His final concert, he played Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony to wild applause, wild applause. What I'm trying to get at here is there was people-to-people exchange taking place during the time of JFK's speech at American University. And so when he uttered these words about the necessity to reach out, make common cause, not with the Soviet government, but the Russian people, the humans, human to human contact, we were doing that. We're not doing that today. Not at all. When I listen to Kennedy's speech, it resonates with me. I'm of an age where I can't say that I saw the speech. He delivered it in June 1963, and I was a whopping just about to turn 2 years old at the time. But the consequences of the speech, what it led to, disarmament, nuclear arms control, etc. In 1987, because of the speech that Kennedy gave at American University, Ronald Reagan, an arch conservative who called the Soviet Union the evil empire, sat down with Mikhail Gorbachev and they signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Now, in Kennedy's speech, you heard him say that no treaty can give you absolute confidence, no text, no matter how tightly written. But the difference with the INF Treaty is there was a new component called on-site inspection, the human element. And I was part of that human element. I was one of the initial cadre of a unique category of people, on-site inspectors who were dispatched to the Soviet Union. The Soviets dispatched theirs to America, and we began the process of putting humans on the ground to verify compliance with the treaty. And it didn't matter how tightly the text was written. The eyeballs and the brain attached to a good inspector can give you some of the best confidence ever. We made arms control come alive. We made it possible to talk about not limiting the numbers of nuclear weapons, but reducing them. The INF Treaty eliminated entire categories of nuclear weapons for the first time, and the success of the INF Treaty led to the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaties. 1, 2, didn't quite happen, 3, stillborn, but the point is, we were talking about disarmament. Today, there are no arms control treaties. Yes, we have New START there, but it's been suspended. And there's no effort. It expires in February of 2026. No effort to breathe new life in it. John F. Kennedy's vision of pursuit of arms control as a necessary component of peace is dead in America. How do we breathe life back into that? If we're going to wait for the government to do it, I think we'll be waiting for a long, long time. Now, anybody who knows my history knows that while I made a concerted effort to try and stop the path towards war against Iraq back in 2001, 2002, and early 2003, I did so as part of an anti-war movement that I'm not necessarily the most comfortable in the world with. We did demonstrations. I'm not a big fan. I don't believe that they can be, work, etc. And I think I was proven right. That doesn't mean that they can't work. It just means that my fears manifested themselves. But I've been educated because that treaty that I speak highly of, 1987, signed December between Gorbachev and Reagan, it was preceded in June of 1982 by a 1 million-person march in Central Park in New York City. 1 million people came together from a diverse range of political beliefs, religious beliefs, etc., came together united in one cause, JFK's cause, nuclear disarmament, getting rid of nuclear weapons, arms control. And the message they sent that day resonated throughout the establishment all the way up to the president and helped create the conditions that allowed him to sit down and sign that treaty. So there is the role to be played by people, by humans, by individuals. Be our own Van Cliburn. I wrote a book about my experiences as a weapons inspector, disarmament in the time of perestroika. And I wrote it not only to tell the history of this time, but also to put it out there as a template of hope that, despite however bad things were in the 1980s, they were pretty bad, that by working together with the Soviets, we were able to do what JFK talked about in the American University speech, to come together in common cause to pursue peace through, peaceful cooperation, peaceful cohabitation. Very, very successful period in history, but it's also a template of hope. But a template of hope only works if both parties recognize it as a template. Here in the United States, we're having trouble. I'm having trouble convincing Americans that that's the path they want to take. But no matter what, we can't take it because of Russophobia, the fear of Russia. What is fear? Fear is derived from ignorance. You don't normally fear that which you understand, but you fear that which you don't understand. And today in America, we don't understand Russia. We don't have the cultural exchanges. We don't have the Russian area studies programs that we used to have that were bringing appreciation of the history, the culture of the Russian people. So I undertook to take my book, again, Be Your Own Van Cliburn. I believe in these words. And so like Van Cliburn, I went to Russia. I took my book to Russia. It was published in the Russian language. And I went on a 26-day, 12-city tour, touring all around Russia, speaking oftentimes several times per venue, per city, to crowds who were very engaged, asked very relevant questions, but most of all, were shocked that an American was coming there to talk to them. But they loved it. They wanted to talk. They wanted to say, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. We believe in peace. We would love nothing more than peace. And one of the reasons that I went there wasn't just to bring my book to Russia, but was to capture the spirit of Russia and bring it back to the United States, sort of the antidote to Russophobia, a vaccine, one might say. Forget I said that, how I'll leave vaccines out of this conversation. the point is, though, that if we're going to wait for the government to do something, I think we'll find ourselves further down the path towards war. Now is the time for people-to-people diplomacy. Now is the time for the American people to imbue themselves with the spirit of JFK's American University speech, to go forth, to educate themselves about Russia, to open up channels of communication with Russians, people to people. Now, we have to let the policymakers do policy. I'm not saying that we jump in and do that, but we can empower the policymakers just like the million people did in Central Park by letting our voices be heard, that this is what we want, this is what we desire, this is what we demand. And what we demand is that we eliminate Russophobia, we educate ourselves about the reality of Russia, so that not that we become necessarily friends with Russia, although that's not a bad thing, but that we learn how to peacefully cohabitate this planet with Russia, that once again we embrace the spirit of nuclear disarmament, to get rid of the weapons that threaten all of humanity today. And there are no arms control treaties in the process as we speak. So I call this process waging peace. I'm a Marine. I know what it means to wage war, but right now I think it's more important that we take the skill set, the organization, the motivation that sometimes we attach to war. War is the most horrible thing that mankind can do against mankind, but sometimes it brings out the best in man because they're put under the greatest stress to perform things that some people say can't be performed. But why do it in the cause of destruction? Why not harness that energy? Why not harness that creativity in the cause of peace? And that's what we need to do today, collectively as Americans. We need to harness the energy of a nation to wage peace, not wage war. Because if we don't wage peace, if we don't insist on a peaceful solution to the problems that plague America and Russia today, war will be the outcome. It's not an answer, but what it is a death sentence for all of humanity. Thank you very much for hearing me out, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions anybody might have.
Okay.